recollect, we are in the middle of a lecture series, and we took a little time out because we had a little impeachment to discuss. And right, we can move on from that. In a sense, the lecture the talk we had last week was really on what would happen when Trump was acquitted, and lo and behold, he was pretty much acquitted while we were in the middle of our conversation. So I want to go back then to what we have been talking about in weeks before, which is the way in which the digital transformation, the social media revolution that we were already in the middle of, has been accelerated and deepened by the pandemic and what it's doing to us. And I'm still working through the psychological, cognitive, attention, and communication effects of all of this, right? So that's where we are today. But pretty soon I want to get to the economy, and more specifically the politics, and the peculiar moment we're in, where it seems like the most highly valued corporations on earth make products they give away for free, right? And what are they getting out of us, and what is it doing to us, and how much of the spasms of the political world of the last 5 years, the rise of populism, the spread of conspiracy theories, the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, can be attributed to what the new media technology are doing to us. And without suggesting that there's a single variable or single cause that's behind all of this, I don't generally believe that that's a good kind of explanation when we're dealing with complex social phenomena that affect us politically. We need to be paying attention to the way multiple things are affecting us at the same time. I do think it would be impossible to explain what's happening in our politics without putting a very strong emphasis on social media, digital technology, transformations in the way in which information is transmitted and shared, and the way in which we communicate with each other, the way in which we associate, congregate, affiliate, and ultimately organize ourselves politically. So we are on our way to, but not quite yet all the way to, getting into the economic and political. I've given you a lot of evidence about how deep the transformation is. And one way to think about this is that many of us now are spending a third, at least, of our waking hours on digital devices, right? And that has crowded out other activities. And I've suggested to you that one of the most interesting people thinking about what this is doing to us at a psychological level is Sherry Turkle of MIT, and that she's extremely well positioned to do this given her background in anthropology and psychology, given the fact that she's been studying media and technology from the mecca of innovation, the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, for upwards of 30 years now. And we've talked together about the way in which she builds a kind of psychological foundation for analyzing what technology is doing to us, that starts from the fundamental significance for the development and exercise and perfection of human psychology of interpersonal face-to-face interaction, right? And so she's interested in rescuing conversation because she thinks that conversation, direct interpersonal interaction, has fundamental existential significance for us as human beings. And in a sense, I imagine many of you would agree with that proposition. What she gives us is a kind of detailed scaffolding of concepts to make sense of why interpersonal face-to-face contact is so important, from the fact that so much of our emotions and intelligence are embodied. And so we need the feedback that seeing the face, seeing the disposition, the carriage of the other person gives us. But also that we need to encounter another person as different from us, to be open and attuned to the ways in which their point of view may surprise and challenge us. And that tends to happen better when we're in face-to-face contact, and to put it the other way around, when we're relating over digital devices, that kind of sensitivity to difference is attenuated. The, sorry for the metaphor, bandwidth of interpersonal communication narrows, and you don't get as much information. You don't have the same degree of sensitivity. The other doesn't have the same license or capacity to challenge you. And so in this sense, then intersubjectivity is diminished when it is mediated by digital devices, and hence this experience of being alone together, of being highly networked, but nevertheless not satisfied with our social relations at the end of the day, and the loop that generates, in which if your major outlet for connectivity with other human beings is via digital devices, but you are not getting satisfied and you feel a longing for deeper connection, that may lead you, in fact, to spend yet more time on your digital device, trying to find there what Turkle suggests you will never get, which is the full connection and satisfaction and challenge that comes from true interpersonal communication. We then spent some time 2 weeks ago asking, well, if, right, interpersonal, face-to-face interaction is so much better, complete, essential to development and the exercise of our psychological capabilities, then why is it that we're turning to these devices? And a major category of explanation that Turkle cites to is what she calls human fatigue. And I find her explanations to be interesting and important, that we live in a culture that emphasizes digital connectivity and the presentation of the self online, and therefore many young people believe in a sense that it is normative, that it is to be expected, that this is the way that they will interact with each other. I've given you the examples of roommates who consider it intrusive or a violation of privacy to knock on each other's door and ask each other questions, that instead they text each other, right? So there is no doubt a cultural explanation to this, but I emphasized, in addition, social explanations, that the way in which we work right now, the fact that we are in a service economy, the demands that are placed on our times, the fact that we are increasingly uprooted on a regular basis, and that our physical geographic communities may not have time to coalesce and develop integrative institutions as a result. The fact that we spend more and more time in our homes staring at screens, the fact that we have to spend more time parenting our children, and that is necessary for their social mobility, but it is also demanding and exhausting, that we have longer lifespans, and that many of us are therefore spending more time caring for elderly relatives as well. All of that leaves us less time, less energy for what is admittedly the hard work of interacting with another person. And I want to just emphasize this point for a moment. Of course, when you think of spending time with your friends, when you think of spending time with your loved ones or your relatives, your primary association is pleasure, fun. And Turkle's account is not meant to diminish that. As a matter of fact, it relies on the idea that being in touch with significant people, people who are significant to you, is one of the most rewarding and satisfying activities in human life. But it is also challenging. It also demands attention, energy, psychological work. And in a sense, I think I put it this way to you a couple of weeks ago. What is hard about it is what is rewarding about it. And therefore, it is hard, right? And so when there is a background of conditions that leave us less time and energy for this, and when there's easy availability of alternatives that give us seemingly a simulacrum of connectivity, right? They seem to be easier and yet to satisfy the demand. We will very often turn to the digital and social media alternatives. And of course, this is especially true for the so-called digital natives, the people who've just grown up with these devices and who therefore have not only these social factors, but also these cultural factors pushing them in that direction. So let me summarize in a sense where I think we are on this topic by pointing to the fact, right? Sorry, that we have changed, right? We are changing the way we use our time. And I think that's the simplest metric. 25 years ago, there was very little use of personal computing, right? It was a rare, an exceptional thing. 50 years ago, the personal computer barely existed at all. And a mere 20 years ago, cell phones were still essentially the exclusive property of investment bankers, right? And so in a very rapid time, we've moved into a world where we were spending no time, from a world where we were spending no time with these devices into a world where we're spending a third or more of our waking hours. And so how is this changing us? And I want to talk about three major changes here. And the first has to do with how we present ourselves. And you may recognize in the way I'm framing this, the work of Irving Goffman, the great ethnomethodologist, right? A sociologist who studied the way in which people interact as a fundamental topic for sociological analysis. And in particular, how much of ourselves do we reveal to others? How much do we reserve? Who do we reveal what to? And how do we present ourselves? And so I'll give you the simple, silly example. And you can think here of going to a high school or a college dance, or you can think of going to a job interview or an admissions interview to a school, right? You spend a fair bit of time thinking about what you are going to wear, right? If you wear glasses, you want to make sure your glasses are clean. You want to make sure your hair is done right. If you wear makeup, you do your makeup carefully, right? Maybe you get a fresh haircut. Maybe you buy a new suit, right? You know, that when the interaction is interpersonal, you start by thinking about how your appearance reflects on you. And then, of course, maybe you rehearse things you want to say. If it's a dance, maybe you work on your dance moves, right? And so this is all part of the presentation of self to others. And what those examples draw on is the idea that for almost all of human history, the presentation of self to others has been primarily interpersonal, face-to-face, direct. And This has changed a little bit in the media environment, or as we have been able to connect to people who are not in the same room with us. There's a story that I love from mid 18th century French salons. It's not just a story, it's a practice. The people would get together for parties, right? A salon. But instead of interacting directly with each other, there would be a bunch of tables and they would go sit in their individual tables and write letters to each other. This is the period of the so-called epistolary novel, right? The novel written as a series of letters. And the idea was that one presented oneself as cultivated and sensitive and educated best in a letter written to another person, right? And so obviously we change the way we present ourselves as social contexts change. But with social media, we have an entirely new mode and medium of presenting ourselves, as opposed to being face to face with others and assigning priority to that. Many young people will tell you that they actually consider it more important what their Facebook wall looks like, or what their presence on Instagram or YouTube looks like, and the memes that they share, right? The jokes or videos, the comments that they make on other people's postings, the postings that they make themselves, and that this allows for new opportunities and new modalities of self-presentation. And I want you to just think about this for a moment. You go to the job interview, you go to the dance, etc., and you say something awkward, or a question comes up that you don't know how to answer. And, after you're done, you think, oh, no, I knew exactly what to say. I just was tongue tied. I wish I could have a do over, right? And the thing about direct interpersonal interaction is it occurs in real time. If, on the other hand, you are, as people say, curating your online presence, guess what? You can spend a lot of time finding just the right image of you, using filters, right? Which are computer generated image modification systems to get your skin or your body or the light to look just so. You can consider 10 different ways of phrasing your comment or your post. And so there's a different temporality, a different relationship to time. There's also obviously the fact that what you're putting out there may be seen by all kinds of people you don't necessarily think of in the first instance or anticipate. You're no longer having a direct personal relationship with the person that you are in the same room with. You are putting something out there, maybe with a group of friends in mind, but the way social media works is it often circulates more broadly than that, right? And one of the things that then people talk about is, quote, changing the subject. And obviously they're having a little fun with the way they express it. But the idea is that we are changing the way we think of ourselves, the way we present ourselves, the work that we do to cultivate a self-image. And in so doing, we may be changing our self-conceptions, our ideas of ourselves. And as the philosopher Charles Taylor put it at one point, we are self-interpreting animals. And so as we change our conceptions of ourselves, we actually change ourselves. So this is one underlying change that I think we need to be thinking about. It's not just that we're spending a lot of time with this technology. The time that we're spending with this technology is dedicated to self-fashioning in a way that may result in new subjectivities or new ways of being present to others, new ways of thinking the self. Uh, to come to the more obvious, the second point is that we're changing the media and modes of human communication, right? We're no longer prioritizing face-to-face communication as the main mode of human communication. And as we change the way we communicate, we change what we say and how we say it and the norms that surround the appropriateness of what we say. And so one of the things that people like Turkle are drawing on is studies that look at transcriptions of conversations and then look at the text message trail generated when two people communicate with each other. So ideally, you would take the same two people and you would have them get face to face and have a conversation, and then you would have them have a text message exchange. And ideally, this would not be pre-planned, occur in a laboratory. It would be a spontaneous interaction that you as a social scientist were able to observe. And what we see is that there are important differences. I spoke a little bit before about some of the etiquette differences that we tend to, in person, start conversations with open-ended questions that are inquisitive and meant to get reports about the psychological state of the person that we are interacting with, and that may go in places that are difficult to anticipate, right? You ask somebody how they're doing and you expect that they're going to give you an answer about how they're feeling, and they end up talking about struggles they're having at work or with their partner or with their parents or their children, and you go where the conversation takes you, right? And that what we see with the text message exchanges is that there aren't nearly as many open-ended questions, that the questions tend to be much more targeted, and the result is that there's less opportunity for open textured exchanges. And again, as communication changes, so do people, right? And so this would be a second level at which our increased use of technology and the way in which it is transferring older modes of communication and self-presentation are not just resulting in a different use of time, but changing us in the process. Third, transforming the use of time and the relationship to knowledge, and with it, the knowledge systems of late modern societies. One of the things I'll be talking with you about a little later today is, right, Sherry Turkle wants us to rescue conversation. Other thinkers, Nicholas Carr in particular, are worried that we may need to rescue reading as well, that we are spending less time with newspapers, less time with books. What we do with our devices is a lot more ingesting videos and digital content that is not print content, and that even when we read print content on our devices, the way in which we read it is different. I'll talk with you more about that as we get into it. But again, the studies are fascinating. You can actually trace the movement of the eyes as you read a book and compare it with the movement of the eyes as you read the same book on a Kindle device, for instance. And what you find is that the eyes move differently. And so we'll get more into this, but even reading is not the same when done on a digital device. But in addition to the fact that reading is less common and being transformed, perhaps every bit as important or even more important is that who gets to produce and transmit authoritative knowledge is being transformed. And I want to be clear, right, that there was a monopoly under old media systems of the ability to transmit authoritative knowledge, and that monopoly may have had biases to it. It may have been unfair in the way that it excluded certain classes of people, and we can talk about economic class, we can talk about gender, we can talk about race, we can talk about marginal perspectives, right, that didn't make their way into mainstream media. But having said all of that, it did have certain advantages as well. And among those advantages is the fact that those who were in charge of determining who got to actually use the media of mass communication to reach a broader audience, at least in the 20th century, often had some professional ethics that required them to make sure that the knowledge being transmitted was verifiable or at least plausible. And that in the 21st century, with the shift over to digital technology and social media, we have, in a sense, bypassed the gatekeepers and the bottlenecks of older media systems. And the result is that anybody can transmit practically anything, and that it all often appears equally authoritative. And so one of the terms that Shoshana Zuboff uses for this is epistemic anarchy, right? And what she means is that anything goes in our new knowledge system. And so it's very difficult to discern what has been verified, what is well grounded, what is coming from a source who has spent the time to acquire the background, the information, the knowledge necessary to be able to speak with some expertise and authority on the topic, and who is just sounding off about their pet theory. The example that I've used with you before is you may have a kooky uncle who at Thanksgiving sits around the dinner table sharing his theories about UFOs, and in less than until he gains the relevant expertise and gets the people in charge of the dissemination of knowledge convinced that he actually knows what he's talking about, then he's just your kooky uncle at Thanksgiving dinner, right? But now that same person with a social media account can transmit their ideas quite broadly. And I'm giving you a funny example, but obviously significant portions of the American public are convinced by conspiracy theories in 2020, 2021 that have absolutely no basis in fact or reality. And so this is a third major transformation. How we cultivate ourselves, how we communicate with each other, what we know are all being radically changed by the transition that we are in the middle of. Now, quickly again, and some of this is review and some of this is new now. This is a list derived from Sherry Turkle, primarily from Alone Together. I've talked about new experiences, the experience of presenting oneself online, the experience of finding one's partner on a dating app with this so-called swipe right mentality, right? Just on, moving on, moving on, moving on, based on a very small segment of knowledge, right? An image and a few lines of self-description, new etiquettes and the way in which those structure the way in which we communicate, and the fact that when we spend a lot of time cultivating our personalities and our presentation of self online, we may find that we've substituted one thing for another, right? And I'll speak about this briefly. Um, there's a literature out there about the way in which the curated, filtered, highly selective presentation of the self online is creating what is sometimes called presentation anxiety when it comes to actually meeting people in person. Am I going to be as beautiful, as handsome, as slender, as clever, as funny, as deep, as smart in person as this online persona? You might call it my avatar, right? I've created for public consumption by spending all this time selecting the material that makes me look as good, smart, handsome, intelligent, deep, witty as possible. And that for many people, then moving from the online persona to the in-person interaction is fraught with anxiety. There are people getting plastic surgery, Botox, fillers, etc., because they want to look the way their highly filtered, carefully selected online image looks. And that at the same time, this is sometimes then leading people to prefer the online interaction to the in-person interaction. And that then is leading also to a sense of loss. Simultaneity, again, I think we've talked a little bit about before, this idea that one is simultaneously in two places. In a sense, right now, I'm only looking at myself, but if I were looking at you guys, I hope I would be seeing some nice California sunshine coming in your windows. I have this experience when I speak with my mother a fair bit. I'm sitting here in cold, snowy, dreary New York, and she's in bright, sunny Sonoma, California, and my brain, my mind gets a little confused. Wait, where am I, right? What kind of weather should I expect to be on me? Because I'm really concentrated on being with her, identifying with her. And in a sense, in that interaction, the brain is wired to expect, of course, I'm experiencing the same thing that the person that I'm interacting with, that I'm having this conversation with, is also experiencing. And I will begin to talk about some of the way in which the structure of the brain has evolved over millions of years for characteristic experiences that all of a sudden we are disrupting. And so the idea that the person you're having the conversation with is, of course, in the same room as you is probably wired into the way in which the brain works. And hence, part of the reason simultaneity, feeling yourself in two places at the same time, can be confusing or disorienting. It's part of, I believe, the syndrome behind what's now being referred to as Zoom fatigue for people who are spending all of their time interacting with people across digital devices. It's actually harder cognitive work, and it is wearing us down. In addition to that, there's this idea of dislocation, or, sorry for the jargon, unworlding. And here the idea is that you lose your sense of being rooted in a specific place in the world. I look at my students, and Sarah Lawrence has been going through a period of intensive quarantine and lockdown, and perhaps predictably, when we brought students from all over the world during a spike in a pandemic. There was a lot of virus on campus, and so they asked everybody essentially to stay in their rooms. And they are then in one place, not a particularly nice place, a college dorm room, right? But relating to people all over the world, right? You know, they're professors. You know, one of my colleagues is in Wyoming, another one is in Chicago, teaching classes at Sarah Lawrence. I've got students in China and Barbados, lucky people, who are simultaneously in class with people in Bronxville. And the sense that maybe you aren't any place in particular in the world right now, that you have no real connection with the particular geographic location that you find yourself in, can change people's understanding of their relationship to their physical environment and to their social environment, the particular community that they are in. Later in this lecture series, I'm going to talk with you about a book called How to Do Nothing. I think that the title is a little funny. Like, we need help. We need to read a book to figure out how to do nothing. But one of the claims of the author, whose name is Jenny Odell, and she's actually an Oakland native, probably doesn't live too far from you guys. Is one of the things she's suggesting is, if you spend less time on your digital devices, among other things, you may redirect your energy back to your surrounding community. Fourth aspect of this, and as you may know, our good friend Mark Zuckerberg has turned friend into a verb, right? Facebook offers to let you friend anyone that you've come in contact with who has a Facebook account, right? And you may know this, you may see this, that one of the things people now do when they first meet somebody else: are you on Facebook? Are you on Instagram? What's your account? Can I connect with you, right? And so it's not at all unusual for someone to have literally thousands of Facebook friends. And so it's an extensive network. It is a very loose and superficial kind of social connectivity. And so this technology has made connecting at a relatively superficial level very easy, right? As opposed to just meeting someone, shaking their hand or saying hello and moving on. All of a sudden now you're connected to them, and you see their posts and they see your posts, maybe for the rest of your lives. What does this do to your sense of friendship? What does it do to your sense of social connection? Does it, in a sense, extend your network, but at the same time attenuate the degree of connection that you have with the people in your network? I've mentioned the fifth point to you already, and this again goes back to Turkle's most recent work on rescuing conversation. The people who do these time use studies, so you get people to enter journals where every 15 minutes they just jot down what it is they're doing now or over the last 15 minutes. One of the things we see is that over the last 20 years, conversation has taken up less and less of people's time. That's one of the direct trade-offs that's occurring here. More time on digital media, less time in face-to-face conversation with each other. And that then, on Turkle's account, given her understanding of the way in which conversation has this deep psychological and existential significance for us, is a very important loss. Another aspect, and I'm going to get into attention more later today and next week, is that we are paying what psychologists now call continuous partial attention or fractured attention all the time. And I've mentioned before, right? These little devices are engineered. The applications that they run are deliberately built to be addictive. One of the books that I'm going to be talking with you about soon, I know some of you have heard me talk about it before, is Tim Wu's The Attention Merchants, the epic battle to get inside our heads. And Wu is pointing out, as is Shoshana Zuboff and many other people who write on these topics, that these devices work. The applications make money by commandeering our attention. And so again, one of the things people who study this look at is how long a person can spend with their device on the table, in their pocket, close by, without looking at it. And for many people, it's 5 minutes or less. For most people, it's very hard to go an hour without checking your device. And by the way, you're often in a class or in a conversation or driving or doing a work task and consulting your device to see what kind of updates, what kind of messages, what developments in the news, etc., have made their way, flitted across your screen, right? And so it turns out, again, that the human brain is made primarily for what is sometimes called stereo reception. And so the idea is that there are two inputs that in fact coordinate or integrate pretty well, right? And so you are listening to me and you are getting some auditory input, and presumably many of you are also watching me and getting some visual input. And there's a relationship between the two, right? Hopefully my lips are moving at the same time that my voice is coming through, and so you can see the way in which my voice is being formed by my mouth, right? And you can see the expressions and the relationship between the gestures and what I'm saying to you. And the brain is meant to integrate that kind of stereo information, right? Two sources that converge to create a single impression. It's not made for what is sometimes called multitasking. And there is this sense now in the professional world and the workaday world that everyone should be able to do multiple tasks at the same time. And the truth is that the human brain is not made to do that. And so the result is when people are paying partial attention to two things at the same time, when their attention is fractured between driving and seeing a new text message that's coming in, it turns out that that's more dangerous than driving drunk. That our brains just lose track of one or the other or both of the things that we're trying to do when we're trying to do two things at once. And we know how dangerous it is to text and drive, or even to try to monitor what's happening with the text message while driving. But it's much more systematic than that. When we are distracted for a few seconds by something that comes into our screen, we often lose track of what's happening around us. If it's a conversation, we lose the thread of the conversation. And again, the brain is made to pay pretty regular and constant attention to one thing. You lose track, and all of a sudden you're disoriented, you're lost, and it makes it harder to resume your attention. And so we're finding more and more attention-related disorders in younger children and young adults. And again, the digital technology, the social media, and the deliberate way in which applications and digital devices are made to draw our attention is at work. I want to be as clear as possible about this. Many of the people who designed casinos, designed slot machines, then went to work for Silicon Valley. And what they understood in particular is the way in which a neurotransmitter called dopamine, which is sometimes called the pleasure drug of the mind, is produced and stimulated and creates longings by a certain kind of reward circuitry. If you get the same reward each and every time, then in a sense it becomes routine and you stop getting the pleasure, right? So if every 3 pulls you hit a jackpot, it wouldn't actually be as fun. It's the anticipation in light of the uncertainty that actually makes the dopamine hit when you get the jackpot be so satisfying, so compelling, so addictive, right? And they worked to make our phones, our digital devices, our applications operate on a similar principle, occasionally and unpredictably rewarding. And so the idea that continuous partial attention is changing us is, in a sense, and Zuboff in particular makes this argument, I think, most directly, an assault on our autonomy. Let me continue for just a little bit longer on this list of the way in which our subjectivities are being changed by this technology. Loss of boundaries, right? This goes with having lots of superficial contacts, and the sense that you present yourself online, right? So what exactly is it that you present? How much of yourself do you present? Are there things like accomplishment in your children's life, or rather revealing photographs of yourself, or the meal that you're particularly happy that you just prepared that you would normally only share with a small group of friends or significant others that now you're putting out there on social media? What does this do to our sense of privacy? What does it do to the sense that for the general public, there are things that we share and things that we don't share? For the narrower circle of our true friends, there's more that we share. For the narrower still circle of our most significant others, there's yet more that we share, right? The sense that we reveal different aspects of ourselves depending upon who we are interacting with seems to be difficult to manage in the new online social media environment. And especially, again, many digital natives are having a hard time figuring out how to do that. I've talked already about the imperative to multitask, the loss of emotional range and intimacy. I've spoken a little bit with you about, for instance, the idea that empathy is developing later in children today than it was 20 years ago, that there's this delay in the development of a full capacity to see the world from the other's perspective, or at least to anticipate how what you do is going to affect them. And we don't really know yet whether that just means full empathy will develop a little bit later, or whether empathy will be permanently impaired or transformed as a result of relying on this technology. And you might think some of the fractiousness, some of the meanness, some of the violence and threats of violence of contemporary politics reflects the attenuation of empathy in a social media environment. And that's speculation. I have no evidence for that, but it does appear to be at least a plausible hypothesis. And so it's not just empathy. In various ways, our emotions are being transformed. The way in which the algorithms, the software, if you will, of applications that select what will be transmitted, what will get widest circulation, what's the first thing you're going to see on your phone app, on your YouTube or Facebook feed. And depending upon how long you linger on that particular video or image or meme, what's the next thing you're going to see, right? That's all built into complex algorithms or computer programs that determine in what order and for how long and with what prominence you will see the content that is available to you. A lot of the algorithms tend to emphasize things that will anger you or provoke anxiety or titillate you, right? I mean, they're positive and negative emotions, but they are particular emotional responses that they find cause you to spend more time on their applications. And so again, there is a manipulation of emotion built into these devices that may be changing us emotionally. Finally, and this comes back to Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing, and there's a quite broad literature on this at this point. It turns out that being alone with the self is extremely important. I don't think I'm going to have time to talk about it at length today, but it's especially important in adolescent psychological development, that point at which you are differentiating yourself from your parents and constructing your own unique identity, having a room to yourself and time alone in that room, maybe a diary or a journal to write a little bit of your thoughts down, maybe a novel or two to present you with alternative ways of being in the world, that all of that depends on, in a sense, withdrawing from the world and being alone with yourself for a while. And it turns out that self-monitoring, introspection also requires a certain amount of solitude, and that solitude is closely related to boredom, and that boredom is actually a good thing too, that it forces us to listen to some of the stuff that might be bouncing around in the background of our minds, that if we're constantly paying attention to other stuff, we neglect or don't pay sufficient attention to. It's also important for creativity, for solving those little nagging problems, like something at work or something in your home, or for coming up with a new idea that might be important to a project that you're working on. All of that seems to take a certain amount of time in which your mind is not occupied with a particular activity or a particular task in front of you. And again, when social scientists and psychologists put people in laboratory settings with phones, with nothing to do, and they structured this cleverly as if you're waiting for the task, what they find is that people don't like solitude, don't like boredom if they have a phone. And so the experiment works by allowing them to keep their phone or taking the phone away from them. And the people who are allowed to keep their phones almost immediately, as soon as there's downtime, go on to their phones. And they then ask after the experiment is done, what did you do? What did you think about? And the people who have their phones, they basically said, oh, I just checked my email, I checked my Facebook account, I checked the New York Times, or whatever it is that you do on the device. And they didn't have much to say. And the people who were asked to check their phone before they went into the room so they didn't have access to it, often reported that they actually had important ideas, remembered something that they had forgotten or neglected, thought about somebody that they needed to be in contact with, had a breakthrough on something they were working with as a result of being forced to just sit there with nothing to do without a phone in hand. And so solitude, right, is a big loaded term. It sometimes sounds lonely, but the basic idea is time alone with oneself without distraction. And because of the way these devices are engineered to demand our continuous partial attention, one of the things that the people who write about technology are deeply concerned about is that we just don't spend as much time with ourselves, bored, and taking advantage of that opportunity to reflect as we used to. All right, I will stop there. I can see already I've got at least one comment in the chat bar. Let me look at that. But I'd also invite whoever wants to ask a question. And it looks like Anne is first up, first on the draw. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, one thing, I follow what you're saying, and I find it all very depressing. So I hope that we will get eventually to something that helps us deal with these issues. The issues aren't going to go away, the conditions of that we're talking about. But those of us who are thinking about it need to find a way to deal with it that isn't quite so depressing. So I'm just saying, I hope you'll get to this as we move along, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, no, well, and I can already start getting to it, right? And so Sherry Turkle uses the term moratorium, right? And she also talks sometimes about digital sabbatical. So, right, the moratorium might be dinner time. It might be before 8 o'clock in the morning, or the first hour that you're awake. It might be after 8 o'clock at night, but that you make a commitment to yourself that you will take a break from digital connectivity for a certain number of hours a day on a specified schedule, right? And then the idea of sabbatical, and she's particularly fond of summer camps where kids go where the requirement is that you can't have a phone, right? And that the result of the kids being deprived of their phones is that they spend the first 5 days, I think the term they sometimes use is jonesing, right? That's where you're addicted and longing for the thing that you're addicted to. And then after that, you begin to discover all kinds of fun and interesting things that you do when you are not pulled into the digital web, right? And so one of the things she is suggesting is that we have to be deliberate about this, and that we have to find ways of recognizing that the technology that we use is engineered to be addictive. It works on the brain to diminish our agency, and it's hard to resist. We need to therefore put in place hard and fast rules with ourselves. In a sense, you should treat the phone the way you treat cigarettes or alcohol. If you've got a problem with containing your alcohol consumption, you make a rule for yourself. I'm only going to have one glass of wine, right? Similarly, you need to be making rules for yourself about how you use these devices. And when you do, you will actually eventually find yourself rewarded for having done so. So that's the beginning of the answer. But all of that is voluntary. And in a sense, it takes will, it takes information. And one of the suggestions we're going to get into, especially with Shoshana Zuboff, is that this is a domain where it makes good sense to have regulation. And when we need regulation, we typically turn to the government. We don't just ask those who are weak-willed or poorly informed, or who get shaped very young by the use of the device, right? You can think here of tobacco and the way in which the tobacco industry for so long targeted adolescents to try to establish a lifelong addiction, that we need more support than we're going to be able to generate for ourselves. We need policy. And so I think that's the direction that I'm going in these lectures, is laying the groundwork for the idea that although it's a little bit different with a device that is used for political communication, you have to be careful to find ways to regulate it that are compatible with the First Amendment. You nevertheless do need to be regulated. Let me read for a moment Ruth's comment, and then Marion will be next. Ruth had said in the chat that for your age group, things are different. And I absolutely agree. And that's part of the distinction between digital natives and digital transplants. You guys didn't grow up with this technology, so you already have had experiences of the satisfaction that comes with non-mediated technology, with not wasting all your time on social media. But having said that, I think Ruth is also emphasizing that during the pandemic, being a particularly vulnerable population, you guys have appreciated having social media and other kinds of digital interaction because it's the only social interaction you have. I 100% agree with that. And I'm certainly grateful that we have been able to continue our meetings despite the fact that we are not in the Sky Room anymore. And I hope it's meaningful for you guys as well. But Ruth also points out that it's only about a third of the population that ever is, in fact, tuning into these or the other most popular activities. And that's in part because a significant portion of the population of Piedmont Gardens, and it's not exceptional. If anything, I would guess it's a higher proportion of Piedmont Gardens, but it's still small, actually uses digital technology, and a significant portion doesn't use it at all. And I'll just tell you very briefly that in an hour's time, my 85-year-old father will get his first vaccine. And he wouldn't be getting it, frankly, at least not today, if it weren't for me. And I let him try for a couple weeks to get it, and he just ran into impediment after impediment and got frustrated. And I ended up taking over and navigating the technological obstacles to get him his Sutter Health vaccine appointment. And it was easy for me, right? And so yes, at different points in time, it gets more and more difficult to adapt to new technology. I absolutely agree, Ruth, and worthwhile noting. All right, Marion, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say one of the things that has happened to me is that there's a huge difference in media, whether there's video or whether there's just audio. I find that if I want to talk to somebody and I don't know them very well and I'm not sure if they want to talk to me or how much time they have, that audio is the appropriate social way of making an appointment or of asking them for something or having a conversation. Because it seems like when you ask for video, you're asking for all the things that you said we prepare in the video. How we look, how our hair looks, how our background looks, whether there's sunshine coming in, whether we look like we're kind of depressed or whether we look like we're really enthusiastic about the conversation. So that the difference between audio and video has struck me as being significant. And the interesting thing is that if I want to really discuss an issue, you know, a political issue or a social issue or a family issue, it's easier to do that without the video, because
Right.
you have to sort of prepare yourself and focus on the issue that's involved rather than 6 other things at the same time.
And Marian, I'm sure you know that when the telephone was first developed, people found the disembodied voice on the receiver to be really strange, right? And it took some getting used to. Of course, at that point, video calling was not a possibility, right? And so, of course, if you're in the face-to-face interaction, then you expect to see the other person's face. But with FaceTime and other video phone technology or video calling technology, now we are able to switch over to not just speaking with, but actually seeing the other person. Still relatively new. Who knows, right? 10 years from now, whether all conversations or most conversations will look like that. But I completely agree that there's something a little intrusive about it. And so I do an awful lot of Zooming. And I get myself prepared, right, for the Zoom. I'm wearing a blazer and a decent shirt. One of my students said the other day that I should sell my background because it's a nice background. And I did spend a little bit of time. You may notice that there's art on the wall now, and there wasn't art on the wall a few months ago. I wanted it to look nice because this is, in a sense, the way in which I teach at this point. But yes, that when I'm getting ready to Zoom, I take a little bit of time to get myself together and presentable. When it comes to like a salesperson wanting to FaceTime with me, no way, right? And so yes, having some sense of boundaries and appropriateness makes sense. But I do think there's a deeper problem about the invasiveness of this technology, about being 100% tethered all the time, right? And so to take a different idea with regards to this, you used to leave work and work was over, right? And unless it was a real emergency, you didn't expect to get a phone call from work at home at night, right? I was in a meeting with the president of my college who said, well, I hope you got the email from me last night. And then she kind of caught herself and she said, well, I hope you didn't read it last night, because she sent the email at 10:40 at night, right? And this idea that one is 100% accountable, basically all waking hours, to be available for communication, has in a sense also blurred the boundary between work and leisure. And so it's one thing to say, I'm not going to video call with you. It's another thing to say, it's 7 o'clock at night and I'm done for the day. I'm not going to check my work email anymore. And so many of us, right, there's not a distinction between our work email and our personal email. John has put in the chat, a big effect of aging, I think, is rapid decline in the ability to do 2 or more things at once. Concentration is such a scarce resource. Well, yes, John, but the findings from cognitive science is that it's always hard to do 2 or more things at once, right? And so, you know, yes, concentration and speed of cognitive processing, ability to form new neural networks, all of that gets more difficult as you get older. Doesn't mean it goes away. And I really want to emphasize that, right? The literature is, I think, quite convincing that we learn very well in our 80s and 90s, at least many of us do, right? And that the trick is to keep yourself engaged, and then you're going to keep learning. All right, I do have to stretch my legs for a few minutes and get ready for another lecture. I'm gonna say good afternoon. Is it afternoon there? No, I'll say enjoy the rest of your weekend. How's that? And really nice being with you guys again. Take care. See you next Saturday. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you, David.